Have you ever asked yourself why some crimes feel ordinary, while others lodge themselves so deeply into our memory that we can't stop thinking about them? Every year, across the world, thousands of crimes are committed. Theft, fraud, burglary, they're terrible, yes, but they don't crawl under our skin. What does? It's the shocking ones. The ones that break every expectation, that flip human behavior upside down. The ones that are so extreme, so beyond comprehension, that they make you stop in your tracks and whisper, how could anyone do this? Let me give you a few examples. In 1922, in a small farmstead in Germany, an entire family of 6 was murdered in the middle of the night at Hinterkaifeck. The killer, or killers, lived on the farm for days afterward, eating the family's food, taking care of the livestock, sleeping under the same roof as the dead. To this day, no one knows who was responsible. Imagine that, someone living among the bodies of their victims, unseen, undetected, and then disappearing forever. Shocking, isn't it? Or take the case of Sylvia Likens in 1965, a 16-year-old girl in Indianapolis who was left in the care of a woman named Gertrude Banaszewski. What followed was weeks of escalating abuse so horrific that even hardened police officers couldn't comprehend it. Neighbors had heard screams, children had witnessed the torment, but no one intervened until it was too late. The sheer cruelty of it, inflicted not just by one person but by a household, has made the case one of the most infamous in American history. And then there's Jonestown in 1978. More than 900 people died in a remote settlement in Guyana, led to their deaths by cult leader Jim Jones. Mothers gave poison to their children. Families collapsed together under the weight of manipulation and madness. The world had never seen anything like it before, and the name Jonestown has become synonymous with mass tragedy. So when we ask, what is the most shocking true crime case, there's no shortage of candidates. Each one of these stories has the power to grip you, to disturb you, to keep you awake at night. But here's the thing, while all of them are shocking, one case stands apart. Not because it claimed the highest number of victims, or because it made the biggest headlines, but because of the terrifying window it opened into the human mind. You see, some crimes shock us because they're massive, mass murder, cult suicides, entire families wiped out. But others shock us on a deeper level, because they are intimate. They show us not just what was done, but how it was done. They force us to confront the darkest corners of human psychology, where cruelty is not an accident of rage or war, but something planned, crafted, and carried out with chilling patience. What could be more terrifying than a person who doesn't just kill, but builds a place designed for suffering? That's where our story tonight leads. Because while there are many shocking crimes, there is one case so disturbing, so unbelievable, that FBI agents, seasoned detectives, and true crime experts still call it one of the darkest in modern history. This isn't a mass murder on a battlefield. It isn't a crime of passion in the heat of the moment. It is something different. Something colder. Something that shows what happens when cruelty becomes ritual, when violence becomes obsession. Over the years, fragments of the story have surfaced. Police reports. Eyewitness accounts. Evidence collected from a place that, on the outside, looked ordinary. A small trailer sitting in the New Mexico desert. But inside? Inside was something that investigators would later describe as one of the most horrifying crime scenes they had ever encountered. And here's the part that makes this case so shocking: it wasn't just the crimes themselves. It was the preparation. The planning. The way the man at the center of it all built his life around the idea of control, pain, and power. He wasn't just committing crimes. He was designing them, scripting them, and recording them in a way that defies understanding. Think back to those other cases: Hinterkaifeck, Sylvia Likens, Jonestown. They were shocking, yes, but they were also chaotic. In Hinterkaifeck, the killer was never known. In Jonestown, the tragedy unfolded in a desperate climax. But in this case, there was no chaos. There was design. There was order. There was a man who thought of cruelty the way an architect thinks of blueprints. What kind of person builds a torture chamber and calls it a toy? Tonight, we're going to dive into the world of David Parker Ray, a name that may not be as instantly recognizable as Charles Manson or Ted Bundy, but one that hides perhaps the most shocking true crime case ever uncovered. Known as the Toy Box Killer, Ray constructed a soundproof trailer in which he carried out unimaginable acts. Investigators believe there may have been dozens of victims, possibly more, but to this day, only a handful have ever been identified. The story of the Toy Box Killer is not easy to hear. It's not meant to be. But if you want to understand what makes a crime truly shocking, if you want to see why this case is often called one of the darkest of all time, then stay with me. Because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about human cruelty. David Parker Ray didn't just carry out his crimes. He recorded them. He made tapes. Tapes that investigators would later describe as some of the most disturbing evidence ever collected. Tapes that began with his voice calmly explaining what he was about to do to his victims. Imagine pressing play on one of those tapes. Imagine being an investigator, sitting in a quiet room, and hearing the voice of a man calmly describing horrors beyond comprehension. That's where this story is headed. So, what's the most shocking true crime case? Some will argue for Jonestown. Others for Sylvia Likens. But as you'll see, the Toy Box Killer earns that title in a way few others can. Because this case isn't just about murder. It's about psychology. It's about design. It's about a man who built his own chamber of nightmares, and then invited his victims inside. Why do we watch, read, and listen to true crime? Why do millions of people tune in every week to hear about cases they've never lived through and victims they've never met? On the surface, it doesn't make sense. Crime is tragedy. It's suffering. It's the worst of humanity. And yet, true crime is one of the most popular forms of storytelling in the world. Maybe it's because true crime lets us step close to danger without actually being in it. We can hear about killers, stalkers, and con men from the safety of our homes. We can explore the darkest corners of human behavior, all while sitting on the couch with the lights on. That distance makes it safe. But the impact still feels real. Some experts say we are fascinated with true crime because it teaches us survival. Every story becomes a lesson. Don't walk alone at night. Trust your instincts. Be careful who you let in. Listening to these stories sharpens us, keeps us alert, makes us feel just a little more prepared if the unthinkable ever happens. Others say it's about justice. We want to see wrongs made right. We want to see killers caught, trials held, verdicts delivered. In a world that often feels chaotic, true crime promises a narrative arc, a beginning, a middle, and, hopefully, an end. But what happens when the ending never comes? What happens when the killer is never caught, or when the crimes are so bizarre that even justice feels inadequate? That's when fascination turns into obsession. And isn't that what makes some crimes shocking, the way they refuse to be explained or contained? Think of the word shocking. What does it really mean in the context of crime? A crime can shock us because of the brutality of the act itself, like a mass murder. It can shock us because of who the victims are, children, families, people who seem especially innocent. It can shock us because of the circumstances, a killer who hides in plain sight, a case that goes unsolved for decades. But the deepest shock, the kind that lingers, comes from crimes that reveal something about the human mind we'd rather not know. The Toy Box Killer is one of those. His crimes don't just horrify us. They force us to confront questions about power, cruelty, and control. Questions that don't have comfortable answers. Let's put it this way, many killers act out of rage, jealousy, greed. Their crimes are terrible, yes, but also familiar. We can at least understand the motive, even if we don't excuse it. But David Parker Ray? His crimes weren't about jealousy. They weren't about money. They weren't even about passion. They were about design. He engineered his crimes. He planned them like projects. He built an environment for them. And that, more than anything else, is what makes this case so disturbing. What does it say about someone when violence isn't just an act, but a hobby? A craft? A ritual? Before we get to the toy box itself, that infamous trailer in the desert, it's worth pausing to see how cases like this fit into the broader story of true crime fascination. Look at the names that dominate the genre: Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy. Their cases shocked because they shattered the illusion of safety. Bundy looked like the boy next door. Dahmer lived in an apartment building surrounded by neighbors. Gacy entertained children at parties dressed as a clown. These were men who hid their cruelty behind masks of normalcy. And when the mask came off, the public was horrified. David Parker Ray's mask was different. He wasn't charming like Bundy or flamboyant like Gacy. He wasn't even a household name. But that almost makes it worse. Because it means he could operate in the shadows for years, decades even, without attracting the same attention. He blended into the quiet of the New Mexico desert. And in that quiet, he built something few could have imagined. So why is his case less well-known than Bundy's or Dahmer's? Some say it's because the details were so disturbing that the media hesitated to report them fully. Others suggest it's because many of his victims were marginalized, women who lived on the edges of society, whose disappearances were not always investigated with urgency. And perhaps part of it is because Ray himself never gave the world the satisfaction of a full confession. He kept his secrets. He took them with him. And secrets, as you know, leave us unsettled. After all, what's more frightening, a killer who brags about his crimes, or a killer who lets silence do the talking? That's what we're diving into tonight. The silence. The secrecy. The shocking details that slowly emerged after one woman did the unthinkable: she escaped the toy box. Without her, this case might never have been discovered. Without her, Ray's crimes might still be hidden beneath the desert sand. Think about that. Years of careful planning. A torture chamber disguised as an ordinary trailer. A man whose voice on tape described acts so chilling that even the FBI agents who heard them were shaken. And all of it nearly stayed buried forever. But it didn't. And that's why this case matters. Because it shows us the razor-thin line between hidden horror and revealed truth. Because it forces us to ask, how many crimes never come to light at all? How many monsters live among us, their secrets locked away where no one can see? As we move forward, we're going to step into that world. Into the New Mexico desert. Into the life of David Parker Ray. Into the toy box itself, the place where shock becomes something darker, something unforgettable. And when you hear what investigators found inside, you'll understand why this case isn't just another entry in true crime history. It's the one that still makes even hardened professionals shake their heads and whisper, "This is the most shocking case of them all." When people think of monsters, they usually picture something obvious. A shadowy figure lurking in the dark. A face twisted with rage. But the most dangerous monsters often don't look like that at all. They look ordinary. They pass you on the street without raising suspicion. They blend in. David Parker Ray was one of those. To neighbors in the small town of Elephant Butte, New Mexico, he seemed quiet, unremarkable. He worked as a mechanic. He had friends. He wasn't the sort of man anyone pointed to and whispered about. And maybe that's what makes this story even more terrifying. Because behind that mask of ordinariness, Ray was building something unspeakable. He lived in a modest home, not far from the desert, where the horizon stretched wide and empty. Out back, he kept a trailer, a 22-foot-long white semi-trailer, locked, reinforced, and off-limits to anyone but him. To most, it looked like storage. Maybe equipment. Nothing unusual in a place where space was cheap and privacy was easy. But inside, that trailer was no ordinary storage unit. Inside was what Ray himself called his toy box. And the name alone should send a shiver down your spine. What kind of man names a chamber of horror after something meant for children? Step inside, and you would have found walls lined with whips, chains, surgical tools, clamps, saws. A gynecological chair was bolted to the floor. There were mirrors positioned so victims would be forced to watch themselves. Diagrams and instructions were taped to the walls, outlining how to carry out acts too cruel to repeat. It wasn't chaos, it was organized, labeled, methodical. This was not the lair of a man acting on impulse. This was the workshop of someone who thought cruelty was a craft. But perhaps the most disturbing part was the audio system. Before each session, Ray would play a cassette tape, a pre-recorded message he made for his victims. On it, his voice, calm and steady, would tell them exactly what was about to happen, what they could expect, and how futile it was to resist. Imagine being tied down in that trailer, hearing the voice of your captor explaining in detail what he planned to do to you. Imagine knowing it was real, not a threat, but a script that had already been followed many times before. The toy box wasn't just a place. It was a machine for breaking people. And according to investigators, Ray used it on dozens of victims over the years. Some believe there were more than 50. Others suggest the number could have been closer to 100. The desert around Elephant Butte is vast, and the truth may never be fully known. The problem, of course, was that for years no one even knew the toy box existed. Victims vanished. Whispers circulated. But without evidence, without someone escaping, the horror inside that trailer remained hidden. And that's what makes this case so shocking. Ray didn't just commit crimes. He built an entire system designed to keep them secret. How do you stop a predator when the very place he commits his crimes is built to erase every trace? Investigators would later describe the toy box as one of the most disturbing crime scenes they had ever encountered. But here's the challenge: evidence alone doesn't always equal conviction. Victims often didn't come forward, or if they did, their stories were dismissed. Some were women who struggled with addiction. Some were sex workers. Some were transients passing through. Society had already labeled them as unreliable, untrustworthy, even disposable. And Ray knew it. He chose his victims carefully, targeting those least likely to be believed. That's the real horror, isn't it? The toy box wasn't just physical. It was psychological. It was built on the idea that silence would protect him. And for years, it did. To make matters worse, Ray wasn't working alone. His girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, not only knew about the toy box, she participated. She helped lure victims, helped restrain them, helped carry out the acts. This wasn't just one man's madness. It was a partnership in cruelty. And that makes the problem even bigger. Because when cruelty is shared, it's reinforced. It becomes harder to stop. So the challenge wasn't just one hidden trailer in the desert. It was the entire system around it. Victims who weren't believed. A killer who chose carefully. A society that looked away. A partner who enabled him. All of it created a nightmare that lasted years, maybe decades, before anyone finally escaped. And that's where the story takes its sharpest turn, when one woman, against all odds, broke free from the toy box and ran straight into the world outside. But before we get there, think about this: for every shocking crime we know about, how many others are hidden? How many toy boxes exist, unseen, locked away in basements, barns, or trailers, waiting to be discovered only by accident? That's what makes this case so chilling. It wasn't just what happened inside that trailer. It was the realization that monsters don't always live in haunted houses or dark forests. Sometimes they live in quiet desert towns, behind white doors, in places no one thinks to look. And that brings us to the next chapter, the escape. The moment everything changed. The moment the toy box killer was finally dragged into the light. But ask yourself this, if it hadn't been for one victim's courage, would we even know his name today? Or would the toy box still be locked, silent, and hidden in the desert, holding secrets we can only imagine? The toy box might have remained a secret forever if not for one woman who refused to stay silent. Her name was Cynthia Vigil, and in 1999 she was taken by David Parker Ray and Cindy Hendy. They lured her in, restrained her, and brought her into the trailer. Like others before her, she was bound, chained, and forced to listen as Ray's recorded tape played in the background. Imagine being in that moment, hearing a calm, steady voice explaining in graphic detail the suffering that awaited you. For most people, that would have been the end. But Cynthia wasn't most people. She waited. She studied her captors. And when Cindy Hendy made a mistake, leaving keys within reach, Cynthia fought back. She grabbed a phone cord, struck Hendy, freed herself, and ran barefoot, wearing nothing but a dog collar and chain. She burst into the street, bruised and bleeding, and flagged down a passing motorist. That motorist didn't turn away. They took her to safety, and from there, the nightmare began to unravel. What does it take for someone, beaten and broken, to summon the strength to escape a place built to erase hope? Cynthia's escape changed everything. Police raided Ray's property, and what they found inside the trailer would haunt them forever. The walls lined with devices. The gynecological chair. The surgical tools. The restraints. The audio tapes. This wasn't speculation anymore. This wasn't the story of a wild-eyed victim dismissed as unreliable. This was evidence, overwhelming and undeniable. But the shock deepened with every drawer, every box, every hidden compartment. Investigators found journals in Ray's handwriting, meticulously detailing his crimes. Dates, times, descriptions. They found recordings of his voice, telling victims what he planned to do. Some victims were named, others anonymous. There were photographs, trinkets, even items that appeared to be trophies, small belongings taken from those who had never come back. The FBI described it as one of the most disturbing collections of evidence they had ever seen. It was organized, methodical, like a catalogue of cruelty. And yet, for all the detail, one question loomed over everything: where were the bodies? How do you prove murder when the victims are missing, their graves swallowed by the desert? That was the challenge. Investigators believed Ray may have killed dozens, perhaps more than 100. The desert around Elephant Butte was vast, and Ray had lived there for decades. He had access to remote canyons, deep lakes, endless stretches of sand. Even with cadaver dogs and search teams, the chances of finding remains were slim. And without bodies, prosecutors knew conviction would be difficult. Still, Cynthia's testimony was powerful. And she wasn't alone. Other women came forward. One recalled being drugged and assaulted in the toy box, her memories hazy but terrifying. Another described being shown the trailer, restrained, and released with a warning never to speak. Patterns began to emerge. The victims weren't connected by background, but by vulnerability. Many were women on the margins of society, sex workers, runaways, those living with addiction. Women less likely to be missed, less likely to be believed. And then there was Cindy Hendy. Faced with the possibility of decades in prison, she began to talk. She admitted her role in luring women. She admitted she helped Ray restrain them. And she revealed details investigators hadn't even imagined. According to Hendy, Ray bragged about his crimes. He claimed he'd been doing it for years, long before she met him. He claimed his number of victims was staggering. She led investigators to specific areas of the desert, but no remains were ever conclusively found. Still, her testimony painted a chilling picture: the toy box was not a recent invention. It was the culmination of a lifetime of obsession. How many years can someone hide their crimes in plain sight, while neighbors, co-workers, and even family have no idea? The recordings Ray left behind were perhaps the most horrifying evidence of all. One tape, in particular, began with him calmly introducing himself and explaining to his captive what they were about to endure. His voice was flat, clinical, almost polite, as he described the rules, the restraints, the tortures. It was the kind of audio that FBI agents, hardened by years of violent cases, struggled to sit through. The calmness made it worse. This wasn't rage. This wasn't passion. This was ritual. And then there were the journals. Ray's handwriting, page after page, recording not just what he did, but how he felt about it. To him, this wasn't just a crime. It was a project. A craft. Some passages suggested pride, as if he saw himself as an artist perfecting a skill. Others hinted at paranoia, fears of being caught, steps he took to cover his tracks. But the chilling part was the sheer volume of it. There were so many entries, stretching across so many years, that investigators realized they might only be scratching the surface. It wasn't just Cynthia's escape that shocked the world. It was the realization of how long this had gone on unnoticed. How many women had vanished without anyone connecting the dots? How many families never knew what happened to their daughters, sisters, mothers? And how many secrets were still buried in the desert sand? Sometimes the most shocking part of a crime isn't what we know, it's what we'll never know. The community of Elephant Butte reeled. Neighbors who once thought Ray was quiet but harmless now remembered odd things. A trailer he never let anyone near. The way he kept to himself. The strange hours. Suddenly, those details felt ominous. But no one had spoken up before. No one had connected the dots. And that silence had cost lives. The investigation grew wider. The FBI took over. They scoured Ray's property, interviewed everyone who had known him, and followed up on every lead. But the deeper they dug, the more questions they found. How many victims were there really? Did Ray act alone, or were there others besides Hendy who participated? Some evidence suggested accomplices. Rumors swirled that friends or family may have known more than they admitted. One thing became clear: the toy box wasn't an isolated nightmare. It was part of a network of silence, complicity, and fear. And that made the case even harder to prosecute. Yet there was one undeniable fact: Cynthia had escaped. She was alive. She could testify. And her testimony, combined with the evidence from the trailer and Hendy's confessions, would be enough to bring the case to trial. But trials don't always deliver the justice we expect. And in the toy box case, what happened in court left many wondering if true justice was ever possible. Trials are supposed to bring clarity. They are supposed to take chaos and put it into order, evidence presented, witnesses called, verdict delivered. But in the case of David Parker Ray, the trial was anything but clear. It was messy, controversial, and in many ways unsatisfying. For a case so horrifying, so shocking, what unfolded in court left the public with almost as many questions as answers. When Cynthia Vigil bravely took the stand, the courtroom grew silent. Her testimony was raw, detailed, and harrowing. She described the chains, the trailer, the tape. She described the escape, barefoot, bleeding, desperate, and the strangers who saved her life by stopping their car when she flagged them down. She was calm, but the weight of her words filled the room. Jurors leaned forward. Reporters scribbled notes. This was the voice of survival, and it was impossible to ignore. What does it feel like to sit in a courtroom and describe the worst days of your life, knowing the man who caused them is sitting just a few feet away? But even with Cynthia's testimony, prosecutors faced a challenge. Many of Ray's other suspected victims were gone, their bodies never recovered. Some who survived were hesitant to testify, their memories clouded by drugs Ray had allegedly administered, or their credibility attacked because of their backgrounds. Defense attorneys painted them as unreliable, insisting their stories were exaggerated, even fabricated. And then there was the evidence itself. The trailer was filled with horrifying devices, yes, but proving beyond doubt that each item had been used on specific victims was harder than it seemed. The tapes were real, but they didn't name every victim. The journals were damning, but written notes could always be dismissed as fantasy unless matched to real people. Prosecutors knew they had to build a case carefully, brick by brick, because if they overreached, they risked losing everything. Still, the trial went forward. And as more evidence was revealed, the world outside the courtroom gasped. Journal entries spanning years. Diagrams. Tools. A chilling picture of a man obsessed with domination and control. And then the tape. A recording that started with Ray's calm voice, welcoming his victim into a nightmare. Jurors heard it. Reporters wrote about it. And even seasoned law enforcement officers admitted it made their skin crawl. How do you judge someone who calmly describes cruelty not in anger, but as if he's reading instructions from a manual? The trial dragged on. Witnesses testified. Experts explained the tools. The defense tried to undermine the victim's credibility. But then came Cindy Hendy. Once Ray's girlfriend and accomplice, now a witness for the prosecution. Her testimony shocked many. She admitted her involvement. She described helping Ray lure women. She admitted restraining them. And she detailed how Ray had bragged about crimes stretching back decades. To some, her testimony was the final nail. To others, it was another twist, a reminder that this wasn't just one man's crime, but a crime enabled by silence, complicity, and cooperation. And yet, when the verdicts came down, there was a sense of unfinished business. Ray was convicted, but not for murder. Without bodies, prosecutors couldn't prove it. Instead, he was sentenced for kidnapping and assault. Decades in prison, yes. But for many, it felt like the punishment didn't match the horror. The man suspected of killing dozens, maybe more than 100, would never face murder charges. What does justice mean when the truth is too big for the courtroom to contain? And then came the final twist. Just a few years into his sentence, in 2002, David Parker Ray died of a heart attack in prison. No dramatic confession. No last words. No closure for the families of suspected victims. Just silence. He went to his grave with secrets still locked inside him. How many victims were there really? Where were their bodies? Who else might have been involved? The answers disappeared with him. For investigators, for survivors, for the community, it was a gut punch. After decades of cruelty, after a trial that only scratched the surface, the man at the center of it all simply vanished. No testimony. No remorse. No reckoning. And that's what makes this case so shocking. Not just the crimes themselves, not just the toy box, not just the tapes, but the silence that followed. The unanswered questions. The secrets buried forever in the desert. And isn't that the cruelest twist of all, that sometimes, the most shocking crimes don't end with answers, but with questions we'll never resolve? For the survivors, the trial was both a victory and a disappointment. Ray was off the streets, yes. But many felt he had escaped true justice. They wanted closure. They wanted every victim identified, every crime acknowledged. Instead, they got fragments. Pieces of a puzzle that would never be fully complete. The world moved on, but the desert didn't. Out there, somewhere beneath the sand and the rocks and the waters of Elephant Butte Lake, the truth still waits. Maybe it will never be found. Maybe it's gone forever. But for those who know the story, who studied the evidence, who heard that tape, one thing is certain: the toy box killer left behind more than a crime scene. He left behind a void. And as we step into that void, into the aftermath of his death and the legacy of his crimes, we're forced to ask, what do we do with a case that may never truly end? When we started this journey, we asked a simple question: what is the most shocking true crime case? Along the way, we revisited Hinterkaifeck, Sylvia Likens, Jonestown, each shocking in its own way. But after stepping into the desert of New Mexico, after walking through the doors of that 22-foot trailer, after listening to the tapes and reading the journals, the answer begins to feel clearer. The Toy Box Killer case isn't just another entry in the history of crime. It's something darker. Something that forces us to look not only at the actions of one man, but at the systems that allowed him to thrive. For years, David Parker Ray carried out his crimes in silence, hidden in plain sight, targeting those most vulnerable, relying on the fact that society would turn its back. And in many cases, he was right. That silence gave him cover. That silence allowed the toy box to exist. Isn't that the part that lingers, the idea that silence can be just as dangerous as cruelty? What makes this case shocking isn't just the torture chamber, the tapes, or the victims we know about. It's the scale of what we don't know. Investigators believe there may have been dozens of victims, maybe even more than 100. But without bodies, without evidence, without answers, those names remain lost. Families may have spent decades wondering what happened to loved ones who disappeared, never realizing they might have crossed paths with Ray. The shock isn't just in what he did, but in the void he left behind. There's another layer, too. True crime often gives us stories of justice. The killer is caught. The trial is held. The verdict is delivered. But in this case, the ending is unsatisfying. Ray died in prison of a heart attack, never convicted of murder, never confessing, never explaining. He left the world the way he lived in it, withholding, secretive, hiding behind silence. And that's why the case still disturbs us. It has no neat conclusion. It ends with a door half open, leaving us staring into darkness. What do you do with a story that refuses to end? You tell it again. You keep it alive. That's why people still talk about the Toy Box Killer. Why documentaries are made. Why survivors continue to share their stories. Because keeping it alive is the only way to resist the silence that protected him for so long. Every retelling is an act of defiance. Every listener who shudders, who gasps, who wonders how this could happen, they're helping make sure it doesn't fade into the desert. And maybe that's the real answer to our question. The most shocking true crime case isn't just the one with the most victims, or the most gruesome details. It's the one that stays with us, the one that forces us to look at human cruelty without flinching, the one that reminds us that monsters can live next door, wear ordinary faces, and still harbor extraordinary darkness. Think back to Cynthia Vigil, running barefoot into the street with a chain around her neck. That image captures the entire case. The horror of captivity, the courage of escape, the thin line between silence and survival. If she hadn't escaped, the toy box might never have been discovered. Ray might have taken his secrets to the grave without anyone even knowing his name. And that is the thought that keeps this case alive in our imagination. Sometimes the most shocking thing isn't that evil exists, it's how close it comes to disappearing without a trace. So when people ask, what's the most shocking true crime case, the Toy Box Killer deserves that title. Not because of numbers, not because of headlines, but because of what it represents. It represents the depths of cruelty, the danger of silence, and the resilience of survivors who refuse to stay hidden. And here's the haunting truth, there may be other toy boxes out there. Other secrets buried. Other monsters blending into the background of ordinary life. That's the part that chills us most. Because this case doesn't feel like a story from another world. It feels like a warning about our own. And maybe that's why we keep asking, keep watching, keep listening. Because as long as the questions remain, we're all still searching for answers. So now I want to turn the question back to you. After everything you've just heard, do you believe the Toy Box Killer is the most shocking true crime case? Or is there another one, maybe Dahmer, Bundy, Jonestown, or Sylvia Likens, that you think deserves that title more? Because the truth is, there may not be just one most shocking case. Each one shocks us in different ways. Some because of the numbers. Some because of the cruelty. Some because of the mystery that still hangs in the air. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Which case has haunted you the most? Which one made you stop and wonder how such darkness could exist? Your comment isn't just a reaction, it's a way to keep these stories alive, to make sure victims are remembered, and to spark conversations that matter. If you found this story compelling, don't stop here. There are so many more shocking cases waiting to be explored. From unsolved mysteries that still baffle investigators to killers who walked free for years before being caught, each one offers another chilling glimpse into the shadows of human nature. So if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next story, and trust me, the next one is just as chilling. If you thought the toy box was shocking, wait until you hear about, insert your next planned case, e.g., the Hinterkaifeck murders or the Cleveland Torso murders. Because in the world of true crime, there's always another secret waiting to be uncovered. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and most importantly, thank you for remembering the victims, the survivors, and the lessons hidden in these stories. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and never stop asking questions.